Builders shouldn't be afraid to ask the building inspector for their opinion on things or their question on it, because and I know every building inspector is a little bit different stuff, but when I'm out at a house, I like to help the builder.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Pro Talk podcast, a regular discussion with building industry professionals. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. I'm joined by Peter Kulczyk and producer Jeff Rose. Peter has 3 decades of experience in the residential construction and building code industry. First as a residential builder, then an author, educator, city building inspector, and city plans examiner. He's written 6 books on building codes and energy codes published by the International Code Council. And he's taught classes for both residential builders and building inspectors in 10 states, including his home state of Minnesota. You can find the Fine Homebuilding Pro Talk podcast and the original Fine Homebuilding podcast at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. You can also leave feedback and ask questions there too. Peter, thank you very much for being on the show. How are you?
Doing okay. Other than this staying at home for last 5 weeks or 6 weeks, other than walking around the block once in a while. So family's doing great. As good as could be expected.
So you're working from home like a lot of us are.
Yes.
Can you please tell us what you do for a living and how did you get into it?
I'm currently working for a municipality. I'm doing rehabilitation of existing single-family vacant homes, and I'm working as a construction project manager. And I got into it kind of a fluke. I've been in building code enforcement for a long time, and this opportunity came up, and I thought it would be more rewarding and more of a chance to kind of give back. And I really like it a lot. It's very nice. I work with some really good people too.
You told me you started out as a residential builder. Is that true?
Long time ago, yes.
And what kind of? Go ahead. What kind of work were you doing?
I worked for 5 different builders, residential and commercial. I did everything from cost estimating, working out in the field. We were building single-family homes, townhouses, and commercial buildings.
And then you went from there into code enforcement. Is that correct?
I went back to school while I was doing this, and I decided to learn more about building codes. And I developed an interest in building codes and got state certified and started applying for building inspector jobs. So that's how I got kind of into this.
So was there a particular job site situation that fostered an interest in code? Did you get caught somehow or what happened?
Oh, geez. That's an interesting, yes. We were building a 50-unit townhouse project, and we're getting ready for a footing inspection, and the building inspector just asked us to actually widen the footings while the concrete trucks were sitting there, and we all knew that they were wide enough. They were designed, they met code, and we questioned them, and we just said, okay, put it in writing and we'll make them wider. And then he changed his mind. He just said, okay, and he signs it off. And after that, I thought, I'm going to dig back into this code book a little bit. And I started taking evening classes in building inspection technology. But it was just because of that issue. And, and I will tell you that I know a lot of code officials, and most of them really know their code stuff. And, but this was just an odd incident. And it was a long time ago. It was 30 years ago. So.
That's fascinating. Was there a specific part of the code book that most interested you when you were training to be a code enforcement official?
Not anything in particular, life safety, of course, but structural things, footings, foundations, framing, exterior weather barriers, and energy insulation.
So tell me something, and this is a little off topic, but when you drive around and see buildings under construction, we all look at those, and are you pleased with what you see generally?
Yes, I am. Well, I'll put it this way. You could drive around. Actually, yesterday I stopped at a construction site with one of my daughters, and we went into a house under construction, and I was pointing out the nice way things how it was built and everything, and kind of structural things. She has an interest in architecture, and the builder was doing a fabulous job. I'd let him build the house for me, and I'm a little particular. And I believe that in this part of the country, I'll speak for Minnesota, I think they do a really nice job of building here. And you could drive down the street and well, I shouldn't say just drive down the street, but sometimes you can drive down the street and tell if a homeowner's doing the work or if the builder is. And it's, homeowners, I appreciate them trying to do things, and sometimes they go outside of their boundaries a little bit, but there's some really good builders in this state.
Do you think, generally speaking, in the years you've been in the industry, that professional builders and remodelers' understanding of residential buildings has improved? Have we gotten better at it? Have people gotten a better understanding of how to put things together?
I believe so. And I've been involved in the industry a long time, and also involved in education of the industry. And I believe that the education levels, the education that's available in this area for both builders and building inspectors is just really good education. And when I do seminars and I have conversations with people during the seminars, you can tell that they really have an interest in doing things right. Not only is it a competitive market, but I think it's that pride thing. I think they like to walk away from it and go, you know what? I did this. I did a nice job. And you can feel that.
So you mentioned that Minnesota has good training for builders. Is that like required? They have to have continuing education credits or?
Yes, actually, the same credits that a residential builder needs, and they need to have a certain amount of credits per year, plus 1 hour of energy training per year. So they do mix it up. And building inspectors are pretty much the same way. Building inspectors have to have a certain amount of continuing ed also, and they pretty much take the same classes. In fact, some of the classes I teach are approved for both builders, building inspectors, designers, and all that. And I think it's really important that you teach the same material to builders and building inspectors, and even better when they're in the same room. So you make that connection. There shouldn't be a separation there.
What are some of the classes that folks are required to take, both inspectors and construction people themselves?
Good question. My emphasis is on residential structures, structural, fire and life safety, energy, but they also have, the builders are required to take some like lead classes, so for lead certification, and they probably take a few more administrative like legal classes. I do not teach that. I try to stay with things that I know, but you don't want to be giving out legal advice. But that's kind of, how to build a house, start to finish. In fact, the last class that I taught it's called Housing First Minnesota, previously known as Builders Association Twin Cities, was basically teaching from start to finish, from the how do you review the plans all the way to the final inspection, just everything, touch on all the framing, just everything.
Is that for code officials or for building people?
Actually, I taught the same class for the builders. I taught it just 3 times recently, but then I taught the same class at the University of Minnesota at a Building Officials Institute. So I taught them the exact same material.
What would you like to see added to the training for building professionals in your state?
Wow. That's a good question. I think maybe knowing more about legal things. I think knowing more about financial and everything from how lien waivers work to whatever. Something that I don't teach, but I think that would always be a good thing to add, and then continued emphasis on the building code. So.
I know you have a strong interest in energy efficient building. What sparked that interest? Where did that come from?
Well, I've mentioned before, I'm in Minnesota. We have 2 climate zones in Minnesota, climate zone 6, climate zone 7, also known as cold and colder. It is just really cold up here. And also in the summer, it gets really hot. We have over 100-degree temperature change between winter and summer. And heating bills can get rather expensive. So I think the energy part is really about not only saving energy, saving money, saving our natural resources. Um, and I think also best practices and durability, the way you install exterior envelopes. Boy, if you don't install them correctly, you're going to have some long-term problems. And I think part of our goal is to not just find that they build according to code initially, but think about how will that house be standing up 30 years from now?
Agreed. How cold does it get? Like,
Well, if you ever, sometimes when it's like the actual air temperature is 20 below zero and the wind chill is 50, 60, 70 below wind chill, and they'll see the newscaster standing outside with a glass of water and they throw it up in the air and it's ice before it hits. That's how cold it gets. You go ice fishing here. We drive cars out on the ice to go fishing, which always amazed me. So
I know about that because I lived in northern Vermont for 10 years, so it was cold there, but
sure.
I think Minnesota's even colder than where I lived. But do people work construction in those crazy temperatures?
They do now. When I was working construction, we pretty much took right around Thanksgiving to right after the first of the year, we pretty much didn't work. They just said, let's shut down and stuff. But now it's just amazing. I'm really surprised at what temperature people will be out there working. And you have some challenges with putting in like footings and foundations and extra heat and enclosures. But I remember I was on a townhouse project. I went out to do some framing inspections, and it was really cold. It was so, you couldn't turn your car off because it wouldn't start again. And yet I remember looking up, 3-story townhouse, and there was a guy up there, a roofer, on top of the roof, carrying shingles over his shoulders. The wind's blowing like 15, 20 miles an hour. And it's one of the coldest days of the year. He's up there trying to put shingles on. So some of it's not realistic. We do it, but not realistic.
Model building code started out trying to prevent like deadly fires in cities primarily, right? And unsafe structures that fell down. But the International Residential Code, which was adopted in most of the U.S., now has a chapter dedicated to energy efficiency. I've heard contractors and homeowners alike say, this is overreaching. This shouldn't be in the building codes. How do you respond to those people?
The energy provisions have been in the code actually for kind of a long time. And if you think about it, it's kind of a package deal. You can't build a good house without thinking about energy. And we really need to be thinking about our own resources. 1973, we had an oil embargo, price of gas went through the roof. And in fact, 73 was the year we adopted an energy code in Minnesota. We just started saying, you know what, we need to have some minimum requirement to keep this house a little bit more insulated. And then, of course, it changes over the years, gets a little bit more insulation, more air barriers, more, whatever. But I think if we don't do it as code people and builders and set a standard for it, who is going to do it? And if you're a homeowner and the average homeowner sells their house every 5 years, who's going to be, what assurance do you have that your house is even going to be insulated properly unless you know that it's a statewide standard? So,
do you see builders trying to skirt the rules with regard to efficiency, or are they trying to do a good job? And I know it varies nationally, but what do you think?
I actually think the builders I see around here are trying to do a pretty good job. It's kind of like just go and do it right. It's just as easy to do it right as it is to do it wrong. It doesn't take any more time. And now we've got, requirements for blower door testing, and it pretty much will prove to us if if your air barrier is correct. And I think we do pretty good inspections here. But as an inspector, a part of my job, I think, also is to provide a little education out there. I got a few minutes, talk about best practices and get it signed off and move on, but provide a little bit more, insight. So,
what do you think the biggest issues facing residential construction? What are we getting? What are we getting wrong still? I guess is another way to ask it.
I think there's a couple things that okay, I'm a little stumped on this one, but I think I'll put it this way. I think the codes change too often. We have a 3-year code cycle in Minnesota, actually a 3-year code cycle nationally. And we've had this 3-year code cycle in Minnesota for a long time. What that means is this code process nationally of updating the codes happens every 3 years. They print a new edition of the International Residential Code, whatever. I think the challenge with builders and building inspectors alike is that it's changed so often, it's kind of hard to keep up with it. As a code official, you have a challenge sometimes keeping up with it. And then you need to get that information out to the builders. And I think for builders in general who don't have a lot of time to be reading code books, I mean, they have a job to do. They're out there, framing things up. I think that's a challenge for builders. I don't think it's what they're actually building. I think it's the logistics of the code happening too often. And in Minnesota, we did recently switch to 6-year code cycles. We're going to skip every other one from now on.
Really?
Yeah, they announced that last year.
So would it just be 6 years later you'll adopt the? Tell me how that'll work.
Well, the codes are published. If I talk about the code process just shortly, the code process is kind of a national thing, and anybody in the United States can propose a code. They normally do it through local levels, so local building groups, building officials, and there's a process where you propose code changes in a written format to the International Code Council. And then they have hearings that take place throughout the year, and they have an open process where people can talk about the proposed changes, and those proposed changes might get edited, might get tossed out, but eventually they get kind of filtered to the final code hearings. And then if they are passed, then they basically will pretty much in that format become part of the new code. And that happens for the international codes. They published codes in 2012, 2015, 2018. So every 3 years. And then it might take you a while to actually adopt it if your state likes to go through a formal review process. So
Interesting. You've been to these hearings, right? Can you tell me a little bit about that? What's that like?
Oh yeah, it's like entertainment. You go there with good intentions. You know what your state wants to propose, and then you have a document that includes the other. Well, usually in the residential code, for example, there will be probably 1,000 proposed code changes, and the code changes just for the residential code will take about 5 days, 8 hours a day to review them. And so you kind of target a few that you think are really important. You go to the hearings, you try to be involved in the process. And you also have the opportunity to go up to the microphone, and there's a panel of 12 people up in front. You got 1,000 people sitting behind you and a panel up front. You get 120 seconds to talk with a big timer in front on why you would support something or why not. And then the membership votes on it, or the panel votes on it, depending on what hearings you're at. And that's kind of how it works. I have participated in that before.
Is it hard to make a persuasive argument in 120 seconds?
You could talk fast. You kind of just get your thoughts together and you do the best you can. You do the best you can in 120 seconds. Sometimes you'll have 10 people lining up and you need to move it along.
Huh?
Yeah.
So you live in the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul, that's right, correct?
Yes, I do.
And my observation in doing this for 20 some years now is that area has been always on the forefront of energy efficient home building, right? All the early research in this country took place in these areas. Why is that? Why is it because it's so freaking cold?
Yeah, we're indoors all the time, so we have to do something. And, so we write codes. And I think it varies, throughout the United States. Like I've traveled around, I've done seminars in a lot of states, and I know people from a lot of states. I think certain states, to me, just seem to be more involved in the code process. They do more research, they publish it, and they communicate with other states. Like, I don't want to plug Colorado, but Colorado's got quite a code thing going on there. And I think Minnesotans are really involved in the code process. And maybe the climate does have something to do with that. We're in a cold climate, and we don't want to overbuild, but we want to build so something's energy efficient, durable, and has logical codes. I mean, we don't always support all the code proposals. I've opposed a few myself. So
Like what?
Last time around, I went to the code hearings, and somebody, I'll say a group that really liked solar energy, proposed to I'll put it this way. They wanted to have every brand new single family home designed to carry a solar system of at least 200 square feet in area on any house. And I thought, well, that's wonderful. I mean, I had a 5.1 kW system put on my own house. That's 22 panels. And they don't weigh that much, but they weigh a little bit extra, about 4 pounds square foot. But it's not easy to just design where the panels would go. And it's not easy to know before the house is even built which direction it's going to face. I mean, if you're not within 20 degrees of dead south, it's not going to work for you. And so I proposed it because, well, first off, you'd have to re-engineer the trusses. You don't know where it's facing. You don't know if the homeowners are going to have it. And even though I'm a big supporter of solar energy, I thought it was a cost prohibitive code, and I opposed it. In fact, I remember going up to the microphone, and there were 12 people on the panel, and 11 people voted with me on that. And it ended up just kind of crashing and burning.
That seems like overreach to me. That's too much.
Codes need to be logical and cost effective. If you put in an energy proposal, and I will say there's always people wanting to have R value 30 on exterior walls and R38 on exterior walls. At some point, it's not cost effective. And if you can't if the payback on it exceeds 10 years, it's probably not cost effective. You probably shouldn't have it in the code. And it's not that logical. Put the money into something else. Put it in the better windows. I don't know.
Yeah.
So,
do you think the training of our residential construction workforce is adequate? I mean, you mentioned the programs that Minnesota has, but do you think we should be doing a better job training the people who are building our homes?
I think we can always get better. I think some of the challenges, and I mean, I live in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, and there's a lot, 80% of the population's right in the Twin Cities. What about those people in greater Minnesota that need training and stuff? To get trainers out to do that is quite a challenge. And I think eventually we should have more web-based training, something more available for them, but they should have access to the same training. And I mean, if you have to drive for 6 hours to get to a seminar, that's not logical and stuff. And it's not very cost effective with budgets and stuff right now, even at the state level. You can't send instructors all over the state anymore. It's when I worked there, we had 6 people doing training, and now I think they have 1 or 2. So that's a challenge.
Are the folks who live far away compelled to come to a training, even if it's prohibitively far?
Sometimes they have to because they need those credits. It wasn't unusual to drive up to Bemidji, Minnesota, which is like you could throw a baseball into Canada from there, and people would drive 100 miles to go to a seminar, and you would look at it and go, "You just drove 3 hours to come to my full day seminar. Do I have to drive back in the dark when it's 18 below zero?"
It would seem that modern times have demonstrated that you can do this stuff remotely. You don't need to go to a conference room in some town hall or whatever. The world has changed.
I agree 100%, and I think more of that's coming. More web-based training, absolutely.
Can you tell me about your own house? Do you work on it? Do you like to practice the craft? Is it an energy pig? Is it super efficient? Give me the rundown.
We recently we just moved out of a 1960 Rambler that I had bought 24 years ago. I put 3 additions on it, and some of the things like foundations and stuff, I'll hire out, but I'll try to do as much as I can on a house, even my own electrical, and I do get electrical permits. But I can't afford electricians,
Right. Who
but
can?
I will work on anything. There's just certain things I won't do, like plumbing. I know my limits. Yeah, but I really like working on houses, but I'm not opposed to hiring good contractors that can work on it for me, especially specialty trades and stuff. So
Is it super energy efficient?
no, I think super energy efficient is something that's really airtight. The house that we moved to is newer, and I'm sure that in Minnesota, at the time this house was built that I'm in now, about 7 years ago, they required an air tightness of 3.0 air changes per hour, maximum of 50 pascals. I'm sure it's that tight, but in Minnesota regularly, the newer homes, they're building them like 2.0 air changes per hour, well insulated. This house is, I think they did a nice job on it. On the house I just moved out of, I tried to insulate things that I could, replace windows where I could, insulate rim joists with some spray foam, do the things that were within reason without ripping the house apart. So
I think, and you bought a photovoltaic array you just mentioned. When was that? And
I bought it, and when I was still at the old place, it was 22 panels, 5.1 kW system, and there were some state and national rebates available stuff. And I will say that on an average sunny day, the panels would pay for all of my electrical needs until somebody turned on the air conditioning. And with family members and stuff, I'd rather not have air on. I'd rather just open windows with ceiling fans. But it actually did quite well. And then when we ended up selling it, we sold it to a neighbor, and he didn't want the panels on the house because of aesthetic reasons. I said, okay, I'll take them with. So I took them to the house that we're in now, and I'm going to, I hope shortly, put them on this house. Why not? I think solar photovoltaic is just a wonderful idea.
Will you put the panels up yourself?
I'll probably, I'd like to have, hire someone to do it and stuff, it's a 2-person job. And when I have 2 people that can get up there and do it, just, move on it and get it done. I'll probably have somebody else do it.
Do you have an external inverter, or do you have the micro inverters on these panels?
Micro inverters. Yeah, the Enphase ones. In fact, Enphase just has an upgrade to their micro inverters that make them more energy efficient, and they'll give you a discount if you have the existing ones. But and they're just fairly replaceable and stuff. So yeah, I'll update them a little bit.
Does your utility have a pretty favorable net metering agreement for solar customers?
Kind of. I shouldn't say kind of. So you get this meter on the outside of the house. And when the panels are working well and the sun's out, well, I mean, they're always working well, but you can tell when you're sending power back to the power company. But they charge you kind of a fee for it. Mm-hmm. And you kind of go, well, you didn't really do anything. And, it's an administrative fee. But otherwise, I can't complain about it. I still think it's a great deal. So,
would you consider getting an electric car to take up some of this summer surplus?
Absolutely. Sure, I would. Yeah.
Peter, it's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate that. It's been fun.
What would you want to tell our listeners of the podcast related to fine home building or anything? Any final words of wisdom? I think that builders shouldn't be afraid to ask the building inspector for their opinion on things or their, question on it. Because, and I know every building inspector is a little bit different stuff, but when I'm out at a house, I like to help the builder. I think we have the same goal and stuff. And if they have questions about certain ways things are done, I'm going to help them out. Or if they want to know what the code says, I'm not afraid to tell them what the code says. And I think some builders they don't want to kind of rattle the cage. They don't really want to talk to the building inspector. They just want to move on. But I think most building inspectors are probably out there to also help you. And I think I would encourage them to establish more of a working relationship with the building inspector. That's cool. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for Peter for joining us, and thanks to Jeff for producing. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us wherever you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Stay safe, everyone, and thanks for listening.